of a modern app is just being the client side of this heterogeneous world that we live in. We have lots of things going on the back end. We've got lots of options for middle tier stuff, for web tier stuff, and lots of options for clients. But the modern app really defines what that client does, how it behaves, how it looks and feels. And you can see the best modern app developers coming out of startup companies. Because startups don't have that disadvantage of years and years of cruft built up around procedures and methodologies and all that stuff. And they can just start over with the best of breed stuff that's going on now. The best tools, the best methodologies. Basically what they're doing is they're iterating quickly. You learn this in the Agile world, that you iterate quickly, you get new revs out there. But it's not enough to just get a new version out. You need to know what it's doing, how it's behaving, and how people are using it. And so telemetry and instrumentation becomes really, really critical. Phoning home, letting our servers know what that app is doing and how it's being used. And so that ties into the DevOps story of the modern app lifecycle, which Richard is really going to focus on. But we can use all that data that comes back from users, and we can use that to better the next rev. So we're actually learning from it and putting it back into the next rev, and quickly iterating. And so the startups really have an advantage there because they don't have all that unlearning to do. So a modern app is characterized by 5 things. It's personal and contextual. It's always connected. It's always accessible. It's data intensive. And it's always evolving. The personal and contextual, you use these modern apps. They are definitely personal. You personalize them to you. They know who you are, and they know your identity. And they're contextual, meaning instead of having to dive into an application 4 or 5 screens deep to pull up a record that you're working on, and you have to, when you close that, you come in the next day or back from lunch. To get back to what you were doing, you have to open it up, sign in, log in, do all that stuff, and get back to your 5 screens deep. So it's really about the app, not the context. The context is, what do you want to do? Well, I want to do what I was doing. Well, it knows what you were doing. It should just remember what you were doing. So this context, the idea of context is really, really essential. And also context is critical when you move from device to device. And this is what always connected means. I can have my phone and I can log in, and then I can get to a certain place and I'll go to my desktop, and I'm right there at that place. Right? The Kindle is a great example of this contextual thing. You'd be reading a book on Kindle, and then you put it down, you go to your PC and open that book on the Kindle reader, and it's in the same place that you left it. That's kind of very cool. Just simple little things like that, contextual and always connected. Always accessible means no matter what device you're on, whether it's a PC, whether it's a phone or a tablet, or even a voice interface, a speech interface. Maybe it's on the phone, maybe it's in your car. Wherever you are, it's always there. Data intensive, we don't need to tell you that it's all about data, but modern apps are data intensive. They get data from a variety of places and mash it together. Always evolving is this idea of quick iteration, and we never want to be stuck with the next version. Oh, we're going to wait to do such and such with the next version. No, you have multiple versions coming out quickly, and the tools that the lifecycle tools will help you with that. All right. This is a great example of the UI that we've been dealing with for the last 20 years. Maybe not 20, but 20 years. Yeah, about that. Almost. Yeah. So there's so much Chrome in here that trying to figure out how to drive this car is really difficult. Where's the steering wheel? Right? The idea of the modern app is to take away all that Chrome and just focus on the content. All that stuff goes away, and it's all about content. It's easy to identify, it's easy to see, it's easy to digest, the fonts don't get in the way. Okay? And notice what else about this modern app is that you can see that it sort of drifts off to the right. It just cuts off there. So that is a cue to you that you can just scroll over. So here's Windows 8. And here's that newsreader app that we were just looking at. You can see that there's always stuff on the right-hand side prompting me to just keep scrolling over with my finger. Yeah, and it's all about the content. And the idea of menus are contextual menus. Only the stuff that you can do on that screen is available for you. So if I swipe up from the bottom or the top, those things become available in the app bar. If I swipe in from the right, I have the charms in Windows 8. And these are contextual as well. For example, search. If I do a search here, I'm searching news. If I'm in my start screen and I search, I'm searching apps. Right? And if I'm in mail, here's my mail client, I search, I'm searching mail. And you know, it was really weird because the first time I used the mail app, I wanted to go look for mail. And I'm swiping up from the bottom and trying to find the search menu item. Because that's what we do, right? But it's actually an operating system feature, search. And your app just hooks into it by way of a contract. And essentially a contract is a reference that you add, you new up an object, and you handle an event. And the event is, hey, somebody just searched for something, here's the query text. Oh, well, I'm going to display, I'm going to use link or whatever, get my data, and just display what I need to display based on that query search. It's that easy. But it's a function of an operating system. It starts at the OS. This is what contextual is all about. On your Windows phone, what I like about my Windows phone, even though it's not the most popular phone, what I really like about it is there's this tile called People. And I go to People, and my Facebook contacts are there, my Twitter contacts are there, my Gmail contacts are there. They're all there, but they're as people. So I search for the person, then what do I want to do with that person? I want to call them, I want to text them, I want to send them a tweet, I want to post on their wall, whatever. It's about people, it's not about the app. So that's about contextual. Now, what's new for developers? This is where it gets a little bit technical. So Windows Store apps are the modern apps of Windows. Let me tell you a little bit about why Windows 8 is the way it is. Microsoft had a business problem to solve in Windows 8. The business problem is people were not installing Windows apps. They were not installing Windows apps because they didn't trust them. The App Store model was working, and still is working, really, really well for Apple, right? Because by the time the app gets to your device, it's been vetted. It's been rated. You know something about it, and you trust that it's not going to destroy your system. The same can't be said for a Windows 7 app that you download and purchase over the internet, right? Who knows what's going to happen when you press that next button in the wizard, right? So the problem is that they needed to get an app store. In order to get an app store, they have to have a totally different look and feel for Windows. It has to be sandboxed. The look and feel is one thing, but the security is another. With a Windows desktop, you can just open a browser, download stuff. You can't not let people do that. So there has to be a different mode of operation where the apps can only come from the App Store, or in the case of the enterprise, from your enterprise store. And they're safe. They can't do reflection. You can't do reflection on private members of objects. So if you have private members, you can't see them. You can't see other people's objects. You can't write directly to certain places on the disk. You can't host a socket. You can't be a socket host. That can't be a server, socket listener, right? That's bad. That's how malware spreads. And there are a whole bunch of other restrictions. So this is why Windows 8 is the way it is. And this is why you have the desktop mode and the formerly known as Metro mode, right? It's now Windows Store apps. There's no mode. They don't call it Metro mode. But really, that's what it is. When you're in the start screen, you can only run Windows Store apps. Okay. .NET 4.5 is a new version of .NET. So on the desktop side, it works just like .NET 4.0. In fact, it's completely backward compatible with .NET 4.0, and there's nothing taken out. So if you're writing a WPF app, a Silverlight app, or a Windows Forms app, those are going to work just fine, exactly as they did before. On the Windows Store side, you do have .NET 4.5, but because there's this new runtime that's native called WinRT, WinRT knows that you're in a WinRT application, and when it sees .NET, it disallows certain namespaces and objects to be used in .NET 4.5. And this just happens naturally. You just won't be able to see them. You hit the IntelliSense dot, and you won't see the objects that you're used to seeing. So all of the system-y things in .NET 4.5, like disk access and networking, okay, has been pushed down into WinRT, which is a native layer for Windows. And then the more languagey things you have full access to, like Lake, generics, all of that stuff. So there is a little bit of a disconnect in terms of what's available, what's not, but it's really not that big deal. In fact, me speaking as Carl Franklin, the XVD developer turned podcaster, that's really what I am. I see WinRT and Metro style apps or Windows Store apps as Silverlight 6. This is the next version of XAML and C# combined together to make an app. All right. There's a lot more technically I can tell you about this, but I just don't want to take up your time right now. But if you want to have a technical discussion, just see me later. So I'm here to say you can do this. If I can do it, if I can write a Windows Store app and make it look pretty good and work, a line of business app, or a fun app, and I'm a VB guy. If I can do it, you can do it. So I'm here to show you how to get started really easily with 4 lines of code and a little bit of XAML and make something really special. So let's do that. I'm going to pull up Visual Studio 2012, a new iteration of that. Close everything else out here. All right, so here's Visual Studio 2012. Now, when you start a new project, and by the way, I'm on an Asus Triple E Slate, which is a pretty cool device. I bought it at Fry's, and it had Windows 7 on it, and I put Windows 8 on it twice. So just paved it, and it's really good. It has great touch. It's a little bit heavy. I'm really waiting for a Surface. Yeah, can't wait. All right. So there's a couple of templates here, and I'm just going to show you this grid app, because this is a template that comes out of the box, and I'll show you what I mean. But if you're not used to MVVM, and you're not used to lots of templates and two-way binding and all of those things, and it's a really good architecture for doing a group kind of view of an app. But it's a little bit difficult when you just want to get started. So let me just run this here, and right out of the box, without any kind of data connected to it, the data here is just generated in hard code. You can see that you get that scrolling view, and I'm just using my finger here to scroll around. So these are grouped collections. So you can think of these as collections of collections. And that's, oh geez, bad contrast. I know that you can't see this, but these item title 1, this is all part of one box, another box, and there's 2 down below that are darker, but you just can't really see them all that well. So they're collections of collections. We have groups of collections, groups of lists. I'll click on the first one, and you see a bigger, maybe it's an image, maybe it's got content in it, and then just scrolling text. This is all made possible with the grid view control, which is new control in Windows 8. So what I'm going to do, instead of tearing this apart, let's just take a look at a simple blank project, and we'll start from there. Now, a blank app just has a couple of things in it, and I'll go through them. We're going to make an application that goes out to a web service that I've set up .NET Rocks plot on all of the shows, and gets metadata. I can pull up the latest shows and the descriptions and the titles and then the guests and their pictures and links and tags and all that stuff. It's just the metadata for all our shows. But it also has a URL to the MP3 file and a URL to the show page. So we'll call this DNR app. Now this right here is our ASMX file, our show service file. Now I'm going to call in this app, I'm going to call it get show info. If you look at get show info, sorry Siri, if you look at what we pass in the show name and the show number. The show name is, in this case, going to be .NET Rocks. The show number, whichever one I want information for. And then this is what it returns. It returns the show ID, which is an ID in the database, the primary key. The show number, the title, the description, date published as a string, a displayable date published, a download URL, and a show URL, and then the number of minutes. This is actually being used right now for development of an iPhone and an Android app, and a Windows Phone app that are being built by our Crackerjack team. All right, so I'm going to copy that as an X URL into the clipboard, and we'll go back to our DNR app, and I'm going to add a service reference, which should be very familiar to anyone, .NET. So right now it's going and generating a WSDL, WSDL file, and from that it generates a proxy. Now I'm going to call this namespace plot. So this is old hat. If you've done any kind of .NET with web services, it should be pretty easy. So there's really nothing in our main page XAML here. There's a grid and some styles. The styles are actually in this common folder, standard styles.xaml. This standard styles XAML file has styles for titles and rich text and basic text. You should not change these. Use them, don't change them. If you want your own styles, just create another one, another XAML file. This assets right here, scroll up over here, zoom in. The assets are the graphic files. PNG files with the logo, a smaller version of the logo, the splash screen, and the store logo. And then you have your app XAML, and app XAML, in this case it's VB. You do this in C# too. And our main page. So let's look at the main page. There's the grid. All right, first thing let's do is go in here, and would you rather see this in C#? All right, let's do it in C#. That's just a dawn on me. All right, new project. Let's use Visual C#, Windows Store, and we're going to call this D. Okay. So let's add our reference again. And now we're going to asynchronously download the data from this web service, but unlike doing this in Silverlight, we are going to use the await keyword. So in Silverlight, you use the asynchronous model. You say begin whatever service, and then you have a callback. The callback gets called when the result comes back to you, and then you have to, get that synchronized and all of that stuff. You don't do that here. Now you can just, with one keyword, await, make the call as if it was a synchronous call, but it is happening in the background. And it's a little complex to explain, but what happens is when you have a method that has the async keyword on it, it gets called from the thread that calls it, but it knows when it sees an await to go spin up another task and return that task back when it's done. So it's procedural code that is asynchronous. And I know it's a little strange, but this is the brave new world we live in. All right, so we're going to create a proxy from a new qwap.soap client. And then we're going to get a result. And the result is going to be calling proxy to get top shows async. I'm going to show you what happens here when I don't use the await keyword. Here's .NET Rocks. And we'll just get 5, top 5 shows. Now what happens is, the result here is going to return as a task of the result type. But if I use await, then that, then that task is called asynchronously, and then you actually get the actual result that the method returns. Okay, now we're going to create an observable collection from that, because that's what the type of result, that's what the type of web service call is. Get top shows result. You see that? Yeah, there we go. Get top shows result, which is an observable collection. And then we're going to simply set the data context of our page equal to show. And that is not a method, it's a property, so we don't use those things. All right. Now what we've done is we've essentially set the data context to an observable collection of qwap info objects. So that collection is going to become the context for this XAML. Now, in the main page, I can use XAML in binding. And I'm going to write all this XAML by hand. So bear with me here. I write every line by hand. Oh, that was hard. Okay. And let me just finish it here. Put the grid view in there, and then I'll explain it. Okay. Inside our main grid, we have a grid view. This grid view is what does that scrolling off, right? It does the scrolling view of data. Now, the item source is what I'm binding this grid view to. And if I just say binding, I'm using the data context. It's a collection of objects. The item template, I set the show item template, which is the resource I've defined above. This right here, resource, show item template, gets repeated for every one of the objects in that collection. So for every one of these objects, I've got a stack panel, a vertical stack panel, 500 by 700. Within that, I have a horizontal stack panel, which is going to show the title, not the title, it's going to show the show number and the date published across the top in these text blocks. And you can see like here, for the show number, I'm setting the text property equal to binding show number. Okay, so that's going to show up right there. The next one is the displayable date published. Right, so that goes in a horizontal stack panel. Then below that, I have 2 text blocks vertically on top of each other. The first one shows the title. The second one shows the description in a little smaller font. So let's run this guy. And there she is. What do you think of that? 4 lines of code. It's not about code, it's about good XAML. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Carl, that's pretty awesome. Aren't you? But wouldn't it be better if we could actually hear the show? if we could play, if we had a play button, we actually listen to it, then this is actually a browser of podcasts. We have some real app here. Well, that's what we're going to do. Now we go beyond 4 lines of code to a little bit of code to manage the state of this media player, or media element, and a button associated with that media element. Let me get those in there first. Now remember, this is going to be repeated for every object. You're going to have a media element, and I set the name to player here. So within every one of these templates, there's going to be an object named player, media element. Then I've got a button, and because it's in a template and it's going to be repeated, I can't really have an event handler set up ahead of time. So what I do is I tell it when the user clicks the button, call this method play button click, which is going to handle the click event for all of these objects, all of these button objects. Okay, now let's get the code to handle that click event. So this is just a little bit of code. Most of what it does is manage the state of, manage the state of the buttons in the media players. And you'll see what I mean after I paste it in. And just so you know, I actually did write this code. I wrote it, not only did I write it as a VB developer, but I wrote it in the RV as we were driving down the highway. Pretty cool. I love that. I love my job. All right, so we need to say the state of the media player, or media element player, and the button, play button. Because each one of these is going to have a button that says listen. And when I click on that, I want to play, but I also want it to say pause. And then if I click on it when it says pause, I want it to say continue after pausing the play. Okay? And then if any of that is going on, if I go to another element and I say listen, I got to know what one is currently playing so I can stop that one and then set the button back to listen. And then do my pause and all that stuff. Does that make sense? So let me just show you the behavior first. And then I'll just walk through this code. It's not, it's not anything sexy, it's just standard state management code. So here you go. Let's see what we get. Huh? Isn't that cool? Come on, all right. All right, now let's pause it. Pause. Continue. Oh, let's go over to another one. And let's interrupt it with this one. There you go. Pretty cool, huh? Now I know it's not, it's not a fully blown, searchable, scrollable thing, but it's just a little bit of code. All right, so yeah, that code is just good. All right. So you can do this. It doesn't take much. Just the problem, I think, is just finding simple examples. And the samples that are on the Dev Center, you really got to be a pro developer to sort of get what they're doing. But if you want to just jump into it, I think the basic thing is just to start with a grid view. Start with this code. Okay, it's available here. .netrocks.com/windows-store-app.zip. The developer center is at dev.windows.com. The design guide is at design.windows.com. And then there's a couple other ones. These were left over from our last trip, Internology and Gesture Pack. Tim Huckabee was putting this thing up there. But the tablet show is our sister show, which is all about mobile tablets, Windows 8, iPod, iPad, Android, iPhone, anything that's a device. We talk about it on the tabletshow.com. There's a couple more things that I need to show you here. One is a line of business app written by my friend Robert Green at Microsoft, just to show you that it's not all about newsreaders, that, let's face it, if Windows 8 doesn't succeed in the enterprise, it's not going to succeed. And so the line of business app story is actually really good. You know, it's the same binding, the same kind of stuff that we have in WPF and Silverlight. Sure, the syntax is a little bit different. Okay, that's not the right app. The syntax is a little bit different, but all of that stuff is there. There's two huge benefits strategically that I see Microsoft has with Windows 8 in the enterprise. One is the whole security story, right? Policies and domains and Active Directory and all that stuff just works. And then, IT people are scared by that. They throw them away. They say you can't bring them in here because they're just open. But we can control what people do with their Windows 8 devices. Another is Office. Office is huge, and especially if this Surface ARM version that does not have desktop mode comes out, and it is rumored to be a couple $100. If it's really in that range, and it has Office on it like it's supposed to, that's going to be a coup. It's going to be a huge coup for Microsoft. So, as anybody knows, the consumer client device is really what people are measuring success by these days. The iPad is just so slick, but it's a consumer device. They're selling a lot of them, that's true. But there are very few people, very few companies that are making a living selling apps in the App Store. Very few. And if you look at the broader enterprise market of software, there's a whole ecosystem of people that make their living writing software. You guys. And so the real money is in the enterprise. And we know that. And not just for software developers, but that's where your job is. If you're not selling software, you're simply writing it for your job. This is key. So here's the line of business app. That's an expense report app that if you're remote, you can approve reports as they come in. Charges come in and you can create a new charge. You can look at reports that come in and see what they are and approve them. And it's all just basic services in Azure, SQL Azure on the back end, and C#. The stuff that we've been doing in Silverlight just looks a little bit different now. There is one more thing I need to talk to you about. I need to show you these teller controls for Windows 8. This is their standard Windows 8, and they have all sorts of charting controls that look pretty nice. Line controls. Then they also have some crazier things here when we get to the radar series, the polar series. Sophisticated stuff, a date picker. So I just needed to show you this because Teller has been such a great sponsor of our show, and we wouldn't exist without them. The reason that they are our partners is because we love their stuff. When I first saw their tools in 2003, I think it was, a little ad in the back of Visual Studio Magazine, I downloaded it immediately. One thing I noticed, it was all .NET, there was no COM. So they didn't have that baggage of compatibility to deal with. They started over with .NET. And they were really the first company to do that. So all of these other companies that are in business, they added on their .NET stuff. And some of it still uses their COM stuff when they're good. All right, that is it for me. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope you know that you can do this. That is my message to you. Now, it looks like there's some food stuff going on in the back. Is it ready? Can somebody tell me? No? Well, okay. I didn't get a yes there. So as soon as Richard is coming up to do his presentation, and if we find out that food is ready, we'll break that. Caterers, is the food ready? Yes. Okay. Then it's time to eat. Go ahead and get some food, and then have a seat, and Richard will start his presentation. We have a bunch of stuff to give away tonight. Some things have come from Lincoln. Some things we brought with us. It's a fairly good stack of stuff. And there's always a challenge of how to pick folks to win. Colorado they have one real rule, which is you got to be here early, you not win. So when Carl, my friend, confronted with the problem how to select people to win prizes, comes up with alternative possible. So there's a tablet application going around the room now for you to put in your name, email. You don't need to put down your phone number. Go ahead and skip that just to speed things up. And when they're all in at the end of the show, we'll be using that as apparently a random selector to pick winners. So you can play with a Windows 8 application in the process. So where Carl's taking on the Windows 8 or really the modern app discussion, which Windows 8 is only one small part of, I'm going to take on the app lifecycle discussion. And it's pretty good reason for that. Carl and I's work splits up pretty nicely into, he's very much the programmer, loves to have basically do the problem, loves to solve problems by writing more code. I make more of my work when I'm not doing this. Still get out about 1 week a month to different customers, doing mostly architectural consulting and scaling systems. So you may have heard on the show I talk about strange networks and all the stuff we've done to making websites go faster. And that's often the work I do. And when we start talking about app lifecycle, an awful lot of the practices that I've been doing over the years around how to make really, really fast websites come into play. This is a new diagram that's starting to circulate about the modern app lifecycle. And what's interesting about it is it looks at a larger picture of the application lifecycle. Because it doesn't just talk about development. As developers, we tend to focus, and is everybody here a developer? Can you say you're a developer? Yeah, most of the room is saying, is there anybody willing to say I'm an IT pro? Not a one. Wow, that's awesome. Because you know, I travel a lot. I've done both. It's one of the reasons that I do broadcast radio. Any listeners to broadcast radio? Just a few hands. So I'm a bunch of hardware guy, but I'm a software guy. I build my own machines. I have built data centers, and I do consulting in that space. I'm always concerned about how systems run. And if you're going to get good at making stuff go fast, you can't just focus on the software. You have to focus on the networking, you have to focus on the hardware. And when I was an IT manager, well, you know, the lifestyle is very different. It's not the same as being a developer. Because developers are really business changers. And our job at writing software for our companies is to try to make the company better. Right? We're trying to change, we're trying to improve it. I think we often ignore the impact of our software. We like the problem too much to worry about the solutions we create. So we tend to write software and put it out in the field and never really look at what happened to it, what did it really do. You know, the director of sales does his job really, really well and improves the sales of a company by, say, 10%. He's a hero, right? He gets a bonus trip to Bermuda and a raise, and he's just pulling it every year. But time and time again, as software developers, we double the productivity of something, a whole team of something. Sometimes tenfold improvement. It's fairly normal. We rarely get trips to Bermuda. That doesn't happen. But we do alter businesses. And typically, when we alter them, we probably re-alter again. Now, an IT guy doesn't think like that. An IT guy's job is to run the business. And the best way to impair running the business is to change it. So the IT mantra is, change is good, you go first. Now, when I was in IT, the real problem with an IT guy is you can never get an A. If you're great at your job, nobody can tell. You're invisible. Stuff just works. I was a great IT guy. I had an office with a door. I put a sign on the door that said, no, any questions? Because I wanted to set up a relationship with you before you came in. But nobody ever phoned me because I was a great IT guy. I was kind of lonely. So I turned the server off. Phone would ring every time. Yeah. Try it again. But that's the nature of the work, right? Do your job well, it's totally visible. Break things, and
Now you get an app, right? Now you're covered. Compare this to a developer's experience. The developer's experience is a little different. Because he ships features, he alters the business. We have ship parties. We don't have parties for IT people. We don't have parties at all, right? Nothing broke today. Let's have a beer. Not the same. Now that's not an unhealthy tension, but it is a tension, right? We recognize those two things. The problem is that tension can get destructive. So this diagram I'm showing you here, the blue side, the implement side, is the dev side of things. Defining problems, working through requirements, coming up with priorities, then actually building some code, testing it to some degree, getting it to a point where you can assemble it to something that vaguely resembles the problem at hand. And then what happens? We toss it over the wall to IT and go on to the next problem. Right? The IT folks have stuff to do here. The more important that app becomes, the harder it gets to ship. Have you noticed this? Right? When nobody cares about your app, they'll put it out there all day long. But once there's a lot of people using your application, once it's important for the business, changing it isn't good. Right? They're highly resistant to it. They'll put up barriers to you. They'll say, okay, prove to me you're not going to mess up my weekend. Right? What are the features you put in here? Have you benchmarked them? We come up with this list of tests. We start building up a stack of things we need to do that you have to knock down enough till I run out of ideas of way to stop you from shipping the software and then force to ship it. Right? Not a very constructive cycle. Microsoft's starting to look into this idea of continuous feedback, continuous quality, continuous delivery. They do that by tying the operations side of the business very tightly to development, so that there's a very clean chain from the successful build of the application into operations, measurement, and instrumentation that can feed back into the product requirements. This is not an original idea by Microsoft. I'm not talking at all. The other popular term for this, which you'll never see on Microsoft slide, is DevOps. You heard this term? DevOps. You know where it comes from? Just a couple of folks have heard this term before. DevOps comes from the old school. Actually, the first time that term was used in anger, it was a conference called Velocity. That's at a Riley conference in San Jose, California, not exactly Microsoft territory. And this is where the best and brightest that make fast websites go. So if you want to meet the guy who makes Google's homepage come up in less than a second, he's there. The guys who keep Facebook running under the weight of 950 million users, those guys are there. It's an interesting show. I've done presentations there. I did a talk called Death of a Web Server, where I actually walked through how to instrument a web server that was failing on a regular basis to demonstrate that the guy had gone berserk with the caching hammer, was literally running the server out of memory repeatedly. Not an easy thing to figure out, but a fun demo to do. So I have a room bigger than this. There's probably 800 people in that room. All my gear set up. And, all right, how many folks here developing on the Microsoft stack? No hands. Awesome. So did my presentation, and by the way, turns out we have the best tools in the industry by a long way. The open source guys, the PhD guys, the Apache guys were staggered. And this I was showing in 2008, and they were wrong. But in 2008, if you recall, it was not a fun time to be worried about fast websites. People were worried about other things, like banking collapse and mortgages being underwater. Nobody really cares how fast your website is. So Velocity was kind of a bummer that year. And then a group of guys from Flickr got up to do a presentation. And they showed how Flickr was shipping a new version of Flickr into production 10 times a day. And we all went. It's a crazy concept, but it came from an idea that when you couple the operations guys very tightly with development, you can change a bunch of practices. They're heavily dependent on automation for everything they do. But the bottom line is that the ops guys are able to see new packages as they arrive almost every hour, and they can test them on individual servers in production. Flickr had discovered, even back in 2008, something I've been running into in the past few years, which is that I can't make a load test. My load tests lie to me, because humans are weirder than computers every time. And so the only real load test, the only way you know for sure your server's going to survive the weekend is to put it out there. Let the customers bash on it. So Flickr demonstrated how they would put a new version out on one server, but instrument it and watch its behavior. And they knew what the baseline baselines of a healthy server look like, and they compared that to this new version of it, and if it was over the line too far, they could roll it back. But if it was holding together all right, it would last at least a couple of hours, they could roll out a few more servers. If they had concerns, they would push back tickets directly to development, knowing development would back to us within the hour or two. So they could iterate repeatedly, keep tweaking and tuning the app over and over again. Now, I got really excited about this idea, but I never grabbed onto the DevOps moniker per se, because I've got customers out there that are building high-performance websites, and they're concerned about similar things. And one of the big problems I had was marketing. That we didn't have a clean pipeline. We didn't have this nice, this circle doesn't look like this, right? There are inboxes, and people that don't answer their phones, and email that gets lost in the chain of this circle. And we had various diversions inside this app that I was working on as well. And one of them was the marketing guys wanted to do A/B testing all the time. The website makes money, and it makes more money if you put the right ad in the right place. And the best way to do that is to try it, right? So they kept switching ads all the time. But when you have marketing people inserting code into your website, bad things happen. Google Analytics shows up in the header. Ask me how I know. So you want them in the chain, but they can't wait 2 weeks to try and do A/B tests. They need to try it several times. We end up hanging a CMS on the side of the website to create a whole other set of problems. So when we started getting into this idea of can we iterate quickly, can we routinely pass packages, we did 10 times a day. Our best was 4 times in one day. But it did allow marketing to integrate that pipeline, so they were A/B testing with us, and we saw their code, what they wanted to insert stock after inside. Is that interesting? Now the problem with the Flickr approach, or the problem that we saw in Velocity, is that the tool chain for making this possible, because it does have, there's a certain amount of this that has to do with psychology. You have to like your ops guys, which is weird, and figure out how to work with them well. But you also need tools that facilitate all that. If you're going to iterate that quickly, testing has to be automated. Continuous integration is just as given. You have to have great package management. You have to be confident you can roll forward and roll back on anything all the time. You have to instrument your web servers or your application servers or your clients, however your app works, to know exactly what's going on. There's a lot of pieces. And so up until now, the DevOps story is largely a story of baling wire and duct tape. You stick all these different pieces together to build that. It reminds me of what continuous integration looked like circa 2005. Remember those fun times? Code here, a little bit there, write this script there, and maybe we'll get to continuous integration once in a while. That's sort of how DevOps has been done until now. And then Microsoft shows up, and Microsoft has this distinct advantage over pretty much everybody else in the industry. They own the full stack. They own DevTools. They own source control. They own ALM. They own operations tools. They own the operating system. They have a full set of tools. Now they're starting to pull those pieces together to create this story in the Microsoft stack. Would you like to see it in action? All right, I have to change computers for doing that because this lovely machine is mine. It's an Asus 31, one of the Ultrabooks, and it weighs about 2 pounds, and my favorite computer in the whole world. When you close it, it's so sharp I can't slice tomatoes. But it will not do this demonstration. For that, I need the exact opposite of the Asus. This is the Lenovo 520 for 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM. The only thing missing from it are the server rack rails. It's got everything else. But because I'm basically going to simulate a full bore development environment, and that turns out to be a lot of stuff. We are running on this machine Hyper-V and Server 2012. So if you'd like to see Server 2012, you've ever seen it in action? It's like a muted version of Windows 8. You actually need the Fisher Price integration server as well. Did I say that out loud? So I have actually all of these things are going to shut that down. So let me start these up in sequence. I have to stand up what I'm actually going to show you, and this may make you all uncomfortable, nobody's going to look at that hand up as an IT person, is I'm going to show you a System Center product. Anybody see, you know what I'm talking about? We've got System Center in their lives. Specifically, System Center Operations Management. It's gone. Just a couple of people have SCOM. So I needed a name controller, I need a SQL server, I need a lot of pieces to run this. SCOM is not a product for developers. It's not something you normally ever want to run willingly. Because it is primarily, it's an IT tool. And what it's for is for consolidating logs across multiple servers so you can watch for events. So if you're running Exchange infrastructure, for example, you might have a dozen servers involved in running Exchange. SCOM will pick all of those up, look at it as a whole, as your Exchange infrastructure, organize it for you, and raise the most important events to the top so you know how healthy your Exchange installation is. Interesting stuff, if you're not something we necessarily want to deal with. However, the SCOM's been around for a few years now. The version that I'm most familiar with is the 2010 edition, which works just great for monitoring these big apps. It's got pieces for Microsoft CRM, it's fine. Last year, Microsoft acquired a company called Avocode. And Avocode made a management pack plugin for SCOM that allowed you to instrument .NET applications the same way they instrument Exchange. Interesting, huh? So what does this mean? They've spent a year now and started integrating it into SCOM 2012. I'll stand up SCOM. And I'll also stand up TFS, because it wouldn't be fair if I didn't threaten some developers as well. All right, start that. So now, with Avocode, if I can now instrument a .NET application, I can monitor it the same sort of way. I simply get the beginnings of feedback mechanism, right? There's two parts of that. If you remember that diagram I was showing, you know the dev life cycle just fine. You know the different steps of coming up with features, building them, testing them, integrating them into a version, getting it shipped, and going back to building another one. You get that cycle. But the operation cycle is similar. A new version of the app gets deployed, it needs to be instrumented, it is monitored in production, events and issues are fed back into the ALM, your source management or your feature management to decide whether or not you're going to change things. That's the idea of a complete cycle. So I'm showing you the first piece of this. How do we instrument? So this is one way to go about instrumentation, and that is with SCOM. I'll go this full screen here. You see Microsoft Case Manager. All right, I'm running a one-page website on this machine as well, just so that I have something to crash. We'll get it. So I've just cold started this machine. I'm now going to go through and I have to gin up the website and get IIS happy. So it's a few steps for all of these. Go get to my page. While you're doing that, let's get Operations Manager running. Again, I don't expect, if I've done my job well in the next 45 minutes or so, some of you are going to say, I want System Center, which is not something you expect yourself to ever say. Because it is, let's say, clearly an IT tool. And this Avocode piece is one small bit of SCOM as a whole. It's a very interesting conversation to say that you would want these things. But when you start having concerns about how to instrument your application, it's important. Anybody recognize the webpage? I didn't say it was an artist. There's a button. We'll play with the button a little bit. So this is Operations Manager. Now, down in the authoring section is where we have these management pack templates. And one of them, this is .NET Application Performance Monitoring. So this is where I'm able to, after you've deployed the app, come in as an IT person and instrument that app. Right? So you as a developer, you don't have to do anything. We've deployed the application to a web server, so I'm able to go in and you can see under the dialog here some of the settings we have. So I've added in what the different application components, and one of the things SCOM does a great job of is thinking about applications as a whole. So here I can list all of the web servers. If there are any backend servers, say WCF services we were using, they can be there. Any SQL servers involved, they can be there. So all of those services and treat them as a whole. That's something SCOM does a good job of. We have instrumentation on the server side. So two different classes of events I can monitor. Exception events are the easy ones. Those are the ones that just raise errors. Performance events are a little more interesting. Now I can actually go in and say, let me know about any page that takes longer than this. Or any query that takes too long. I can instrument at a pretty detailed level here, and it will come back as reported events when we receive those lines. I can adjust them in a fairly detailed way. So I can set a performance threshold, I can adjust what namespaces, even down to the individual method. Let me know when this method runs longer than 3 seconds. I want an event raised for that. So again, we talk about this concept of that full life cycle. It's not just instrumenting for failure, but also instrumenting for performance. In an ideal world, we wouldn't wait until it was on fire to try and do something about it, right? Most people try to figure out how well their website is running by looking at the hard drive. That won't help, right? It doesn't matter how fast it looks. You don't actually, and it's not like the server pops a little sign that says help me. Right? Actually understanding whether the server's healthy or not is kind of challenging. It's not a simple thing. So the fact that I can dial in all of these settings gives me a pretty clear view. And if that doesn't shock you, maybe this will. There is a client-side monitoring feature available as well. This will inject JavaScript into any page going out of this web server, and that pushes back to a web service that's run by SCOM to let us know how long that page has been run. So I have some client-side instrumentation available as well. All right, so we have our monitoring up and running. Let me show you one more piece. I need to complete the loop. This is my instrumentation piece. Now I need a feedback piece. Anybody notice this plugin right here? TFS work item synchronization. So I've connected up to the TFS server, and I'm able to have sufficient permissions. Write down and look through the individual projects, and then I can connect up to a particular project so that I can feed work items to it. So you can see I'm connected to my demo project right here. All right. Now monitoring is where the SCOM person hangs out. There's a lot of different levels of instrumentation we can do and a lot of different levels of event raising. I can even configure this to send text messages to myself, although I wouldn't recommend it if it gets old fast. The challenge with SCOM, actually, if you're interested in this, is getting that ROM set right. There's a lot of events going on inside of an application all the time, and you can get blinded by them. So actually dialing it into the ones you really care about without missing the ones that are important is possible. All right, and you can see here, this is my demo app, and right now it's showing in a healthy state. Now it's a pretty simple app. It's one website running on one web server. There are no other pieces. I haven't added any of that complexity. It would only show a state of healthy if all of the pieces were healthy. So it does treat the app as a whole, and that's fairly compelling. Let's make it a little unhealthy. I'm going to click on the button. I'm sure you've all met this error message before. So, a few things. First off, I really should write a better error message, right? Something friendly. Hi, I'm a web server, so I really don't have a personality, but I wanted to be nice to you while I let you have some bad news. Whatever you were trying to do is not going to happen right now. It's not that I don't want it to happen, it's that something terrible has happened. And I'm going to write down the information that happened there. And if you want to phone somebody, here's the number you can call. You can press refresh if you want, but I doubt it will do anything. But what typically happens at this point, the person goes away, right? Maybe they call tech support, probably not. Unless we encourage them to. There is an event being logged, though. An event did get raised here, which is a normal web server behavior. When a page error comes up, it can actually pump into a log. And that's something SCOM can pick up in addition to its other instrumentation. But as developers, we never get to see these, right? We never know about them. They're basically visible to us. This is not a particularly useful message anyway. Meantime, we go back to the monitoring side. I'm just going to go look at active alerts. Now, I could have an alert raised directly to me, but I didn't do that this time. I'm just going to go check to see what's coming in. This is an old one. Let's see if I can refresh and see if it's new. Take a look at that. So less than a minute ago, this error was raised. It's just a warning level error. It was an application failure. And there is a link here which actually points to the diagnostic data that was captured at the event. So we can go and take a look at this. So I'm an IT guy. I don't even know anything about development at this point. I've just captured this error. It has the error message. It does have some information about the exception that was raised, including no data was provided. It knows what page it occurred on, what event it happened on. Notice up here I have similar events, so I can actually go in and see, has this error occurred before and when? So as an IT person, without knowing an awful lot, I'm able to instrument well enough to see these are errors that are happening routinely. Now, what can I do about this? You'll notice inside this event, I have the option to set the alert status. And one of the things I can do is take it from new to assign to engineer. So normally in Scrum, when you have events come up, we take responsibility for them as IT folks. So we'll acknowledge them and we'll start working on them ourselves. But in this particular case, since it's an error related to a developer issue, I can use that TFS connector to feed it back to TFS. So I'm now going to assign it to engineering. And that's on its way over to TFS. Let's go take a look on the TFS side. Now, how many folks have TFS in their life? Oh, wow. Okay. Maybe half the room. So you know there's any number of ways for you to receive TFS work items. I'm only going to show you one. I come in on Monday morning, and my Windows has not been activated. We'll fire up Visual Studio. I'm actually a version behind, that's the RC. We've got our TM now, but let's face it, during the demo, while in RV, it's a dumb to do. Go to query. And I want to show you this. That underneath the work item types, there's now an operational work item type. So I can request any operational work item types. Let's see. I don't think that's the new one. That might be one of the old ones. That one's already closed. So that's not the one I was watching for. Run it again. There's a new one. So there you go. I've had an error. I can go look at the same SCOM diagnostic data that the IT person is able to look at. Exactly the same. This might be enough information, this might not. You know as well as I do. Event logs only contain so much information, but at least we've got that. We've got exactly the error message that occurred. I can now decide this is something I want to work on, so I'm going to accept it. We'll save that work item. Now it's part of my stack. And that will eventually appear back over on SCOM. If I refresh this, it usually takes about a minute or so. This will change from assigned engineering to accept. Is that interesting? Anybody see anything like this? A couple of third-party tools that are close. But see, this is so new, in order to make it work, I have SCOM 2012 shipped a few months ago. This connector piece is in service 1, which is in beta. So I'm running beta bits here to show it to you. This is what is coming. And it does create this ability to create a complete feedback loop using System Center. The challenge, of course, and that's why I asked how many people living with System Center right now, is that System Center is going to trigger product install. It's certainly not a free product to install. Pretty much the opposite of free. And it's not the sort of thing I expect you necessarily to go to your IT person and ask them to install it out and running. In fact, you're probably confusing if you knew what it was. There are other approaches to tackling this problem, and we're still figuring out exactly how all of them fit together. I want to show you a completely different product. I shall just show the slide and we'll talk about it for a bit. How many folks know what Preemptive is, the company? Preemptive. We mentioned it at the top of that when we first got here. That cable would actually stay in. So Preemptive are the folks who make Obfuscator. And the Obfuscator is not the only thing they make. They also make this product called Analytics. So the first version of this is called Runtime Intelligence, and it comes in the box with Studio 2010. So if you have a copy of 2010, how many people own a copy of 2010? Almost everybody. You own a copy of the Community Edition of Runtime Intelligence. And have you switched to 2012 now? Got a few hands that have moved to 2012, so now it's called Analytics, but it's basically the same product, just advanced further. So what does this do? Well, at the simplest level, it is a method profile. Okay? So we have test instruments and tools that we use to figure out how our apps are performing. And most of those are in the form of profiles of one kind or another. The problem with most profiles is they observe not load on the application. You can't put it in production to do it. For example, SQL profiler, right? Great tool for showing you every query that's hitting your database. And if you turn this on in production, it will drop your service. It's neat. And spawn a couple of gigabytes of log files. And if you got that on the C drive, that'll actually stop the machine from running. Ask me how I know. So be careful. Same with, say, Redgate ants. Anybody ever use Red Gate Ants? Great tool. This is a method profiler, right? So we give it a workload, it'll show us which methods it spent the most time on and how long it spent on them and how many times they were called. If you're trying to figure out how to make a website go faster, for example, this would naturally bubble to the top the methods that you should probably be working on and optimizing. Right there, it's going to show you where you're spending your time, most people are visiting. Great tool. Again, it exerts way too much load on the server. So if you try and do that in production, you're going to wreak havoc on the server. So you then have to create a load test to simulate that workload and try and figure out what methods going to go on. And this is where I end up lying to myself because I can't make a good enough load test. It doesn't look enough like humans. So what the clever folks at Preemptive figured out was how to do method profiling without impacting performance. So this is sort of aspect-oriented programming. This is a tool that you run after you compile your app. It adds on to the assemblies and basically creates touch points so that it can report back asynchronously in the queued form, so it doesn't impact performance, back to a web service which they can run for you or you can run and show you exactly what methods are being used and how they're being used. Now, they go further than that with a full set of instrumentation. They can tell you what kind of clients are being used. They make clients for all sorts of products, actually. So not only can you instrument WinForm apps and ASP.NET apps, and you can also instrument WinPhone 7, iOS, and Android. In fact, they've got pretty much clients for everything. JavaScript. You can instrument WinJS on Windows 8. They don't have a Windows 8 client for the formerly known as Metro mode if you're working C#. Yes, that's coming. But all these clients now can report back to that service as well, so you sort of see end-to-end storage. One of the big things they've worked on was this issue of what version are people on a given app. You get a bunch of copies of the app out in the field, you don't know if everybody's upgraded. This would actually report all that back and see what version you're actually living with. And they turned out this great problem with WinPhone 7 where a whole bunch of people would upgrade to a certain point and stop even though the versions continued. The distinction there, why you had two copies, was this was the last version before Mango. And a whole bunch of folks on Windows 7 that were upgrading Mango, nobody knew why it belongs to them until they actually asked them and found out they never plugged their phone into the computer. And they couldn't upgrade to Mango, and you notice in the phone 8 they don't do that anymore. And that came right back to instrumentation. Right? They instrumented the app the right way, so we're able to see what's going on. So instrumentation is one part of this. Now we get into the telemetry piece. Who's using what feature? Here's where I'm trying to get to. Okay? And you can see I have a suite of tools. But as a guy who really cares about DevOps, I'm trying to get to a place where I'm not only compliant with my service level agreements, I know how much longer I'm going to be. Who has a service level agreement in their lives? Anybody dealing with, there's a few hands here, the folks that they have service level agreements. Did you write your agreement, sir? No. And yet, you had to write the code to be compliant with the agreement. And I'll tell you what else. This is where you and the ops guy should get along. The ops guy didn't write that agreement either. And yet he gets blamed. They don't make it and then he blames you. Okay? The guy who actually wrote that agreement might be a sales guy, more likely legal. Which is clearly the person that everybody else can hate very easily. The problem with service level agreements is we actually have to be involved. You're going to commit yourself to an agreement like that. The bigger problem with that is generally, we only hear about our service level agreements when we violate them. If I have an agreement that says these transactions will run in 3 seconds or less, it's only when they're running at 5 seconds. Actually, typically when they're running at 35 seconds, we start to hear about it. If you're in violation of your agreement. You probably have been. That's usually the first time you find out we had an agreement. And then you've got to go back through your code and say, oh, I guess we should go to that particular place. Part of the idea of DevOps is answering the question, well, how fast are we running right now? How close are we to those thresholds? Recognizing that, say that 3-second limit I just arbitrarily poked out of there represents a web API call on the front end that calls how many services going back till it hits the database and comes back again. And how do you actually see all of those pieces of the whole? This is something I thought SCOM did a pretty good job of. SCOM might actually assemble all of those things, set those performance counters in place, and have it report to me where the threshold is. We could do this with Preemptive as well. Preemptive is much more of a dev tool. It ships in Studio for a reason. The commercial, the free edition that comes in the box is fine for basic instrumentation. If you want to do what I was describing there, you want to instrument all these different kinds of clients, that's a pro edition. You have to pay for that. If you want to get into the details of, I actually want to instrument every single method in a chain so that I can look at that chain as a whole, also a pro edition. So we're not done with DevOps. We're at the very beginning of it right now. And we have a few different approaches coming down the path. One of them is System Center Operations Manager. You're going to hear more about this as that shifts. It's important to understand that if you're living in a dysfunctional relationship with your IT folks, the fact that the DevOps moniker is caught on is going to cause you more stress. Now the boss is going to have a hammer to hit you with. Right? Same way you ran around with the Agile hammer, you're going to run around with the DevOps hammer. Right? Or actually, sometimes I don't really call it a hammer, I should call it a spray can. They're going to squirt you with DevOps. Just like they ran around and squirted everybody with Agile. They didn't really know what it was, but they're going to squirt it on you. They're going to squirt you with DevOps too. So it's in your best interest, looking at the tools we're shipping today, to start taking a look at some of these things. You already want to take it out for a spin, start thinking in terms of how do I complete this application lifecycle? Not just the dev side, the operations side. Feed that information straight back into the product list. When we actually surface how people are using our apps, how they're being monitored, and report on that, become features in our application before they become crisis. That's how really DevOps works. With that, I'm going to stop, and we'll take a 10-minute break and give Bill a chance to sit up. Thank you very much.
You'll note on the abstract number, you probably can't find the at sign, which is important for the email address thing. If you press that @123, then suddenly it will appear. So that should speed that part of the process up really well. Now, okay, if you can't find the @ sign for your email address, tap the &123 to get the symbol keyboard, and then you'll be able to go ahead and do the rest of it there. All right. So beta version of PowerPoint, so the taskbar is up there where you can see it, and not here where I can. All right. And no, I can't move it. I don't know why. All right, so a lot of what I want to talk about, and you heard Carl and Richard talk about, is building modern apps and doing modern things with your data center, with your application lifecycle. Now, if you think about that in terms of managing your career as a developer or something in the software industry, what we really sell our customers is change. Whatever we're doing now, we are convincing them that they can either do it better, do it faster, or do something they never even thought was possible before. And that's kind of a hard thing to do. Over the course of our careers, you're going to find that you need to totally reinvent yourself 6 or 7 or maybe 8 times. And you're going to be doing things that you never thought you were going to be doing. I give a talk where I talk to high school kids who are interested in this industry. And the first thing I do is I go up to the whiteboard, because schools now have whiteboards, not blackboards. And I write every language I use professionally in my career on the whiteboard. And it fills up more than half of the space. You know, they start laughing when I go back further in time and I write things like Pascal and Fortran an x86 assembler, or even 88 assembler. And we've come a long way from that, and we're constantly looking at new ways to do things. In part because we're never happy with what we're doing yet, but in part because we want to be able to do things that weren't possible before. So what I'm going to talk about kind of is the kinds of things that we want to look for so that when we're navigating our own careers, we figure out when we want to make these big jumps and how we prepare ourselves for those big jumps by making a whole series of small jumps all the way along. So change comes in a lot of different ways. We have external changes we see in the market. Windows 8 is something totally new, and it's clearly responding to that iPad device. Smartphones are totally different. We didn't have them 3 or 4 years ago. If I go back to when I was a child, we made calls in our house on this thing that hung on the wall and smelled vaguely like your mom's perfume, and you couldn't go into another room and actually talk because it was attached to the wall. And we keep changing that, and then we had these cell phones that basically we could make calls anywhere. And now effectively we're carrying computers in our hands that happen to also be able to make phone calls. And they're always connected to the internet, they're always connected to something. We've made this huge leap in that one space. In other ways, we've moved things like changing the type of computers we use at work. Laptops are past desktops. Before that, desktops were workstations. But there's other kinds of changes that we make internally as an organization that our customers can't see, but they see the results of. We work differently as teams. We use different tools. If you listen to the show they just did with Scott Stanfield talking about typography, the fonts and the way they look were affected by the tools they were used to build typesetting back in the day when they actually carved things out of plates. The same thing is true with the tools that we use. The processes we use to develop software are based on the tools that we use. Okay? We had this thing called source control that we used that always was the way we kept track of things. And it's been radically turned on its head by DVCS, if anybody started using that. TDD is a different kind of process that changes how we build software and changes the way we think about building software. So we're going to be looking at all these different kinds of changes to keep ourselves up to date and keep ourselves ready for what's next. The biggest thing we're going to look for is you're going to want to hear things about a change that bends the curve. If you look throughout a lot of the periods of this industry, you'll see this general growth of something. Because it's just linear, moving at the same pace, and it's going to continue to do that. And then suddenly something happens and it leaps upward. Right? The web goes mainstream and suddenly things leap. The iPhone gets introduced and suddenly smartphones go nuts. Okay? Laptops finally got to the point where we weren't all Igor going to conferences. And now suddenly we're computing everywhere. Any of these kinds of things are great opportunities. Similar things happen if we can bend the curve downward if it's a cost curve. If suddenly 2 or 3 people or 8 people can build Instagram, that suddenly changes the kinds of things we can do. So what kind of things are we going to look for? Now, when we look at external markets, we're really looking at things like these huge moves that we see in the industry that affect our customers and what they want and what they think they can do. We're looking at the things that happened, like the move from mainframe to workstations to PCs, where suddenly we become more mobile, suddenly we have a lot more power at our fingertips. We're looking at things like the move from text and cells in the original Lotus or the original Excel to actually WYSIWYG, or now we're looking at NUIs and things like that, where we're manipulating things directly with our hands, which feels much more natural. We're looking to move from desktop to clients to network, like Carl talked about, where on our Win 8 machines, if we're watching a Netflix movie, we want to just simply go to our TV and have it pick up wherever it was. Right? Or if we were reading a book on our Kindle and we switched to the PC app, we want it to pick up right where it was. Because suddenly we have these different capabilities. Internally, we're looking at the things that make us better. We don't just want to spray Agile on someone like Richard talked about. We want to actually do that to create better software, send less bugs to him so he doesn't hate us, right? Or do things that really change how we do things. Has anybody here heard of the Chaos Monkey at Netflix? Yeah, I know it is. Okay, so what the Chaos Monkey is, for people that don't know, they introduced this bit of software that tries to attack servers in production and break them. And they set it loose in their live data centers. And the reason they do that is that way the developers are constantly on guard for any of these possible things that could cause a catastrophic failure. They're constantly trying to break their own system. And it was one of the things that developers did themselves in order to not have that thing go bad on the weekend. They're challenging themselves to be better. You know, in the same way, writing code when you're saying, I want to have a test that fails before I write anything. We're trying to convince ourselves to do something a little bit better. We want to write code only that really satisfies real business requirements. We're trying to do things faster and better. One of the big ones here that I look at is the distributed version control systems. Okay? Traditionally what we did was we would always submit our code to the central server and there was one place that had everything. And that caused a lot of problems that we just kind of dealt with because, well, that's the way we did things. Somebody else has a lock on the same file. I can't get anything done. The network's down. I can't check in my code. There were these integration problems because, well, I check in my code, Richard checks in his, they don't match somehow. If you start working with DBCS, it gets very, very different because every single developer, no matter where you're sitting, has a copy of the entire repository. I can be in a coffee shop and I have all the history. I can look back at whatever anybody else has done. It's also broken the link between checking in code and sharing it with the rest of the team. When I use a DBCS, I probably do commits and check-ins maybe every 15 minutes. Because I want to keep track of that stuff. When I used to use SVN, I would make a copy of my directory tree because I wanted to save it, but I wasn't done. I didn't want to check it in for everybody, and then I keep working and I go back and forth. And now I have a tool that lets me just do that myself. It saves me time and it makes me more productive. So, what kind of things do we do with this? And now, looking at some of the things we've seen in history, what should we be looking for to try to leverage that kind of change that we know is going to happen in our industry over the next 10 to 15 years, or longer, depending on how long you want to keep working, to actually take advantage of all those things. So, first what you want to do is commit yourself to learning a lot of different things. And learn a lot of different things from environments we don't normally work in. This being .NET rocks, I'm assuming everybody's a .NET developer, Windows developer of some kind. The .NET ecosystem has blatantly stolen things from other places, and they're really great things. If you're using NuGet, NuGet's basically the .NET version of Ruby Gems, and it rocks the same way. If you look at the latest version of Visual Studio, the 50 Shades of Grey version, you've seen that, right? Okay. They now have changed the plugin model in that very well, in that if you're doing any kind of testing, you can now use your own test runner inside Visual Studio in a very natural way. There's an extension for the XUnit runner, for the NUnit runner, running right alongside MS Test. We're running with it right inside the same box, just as part of the environment. And it links into the events, so if you refer one of those tools, every time you do a build, it'll kick off all your tests, because Visual Studio will run it. Those kind of things work very, very well, and they've been taken from other platforms. The more you can look at those kinds of things, the more you'll be better prepared to see opportunities in different places. The next one is to really, really be skeptical. Because for every iPad, there's a Newton. And there's one of the best stories I have on this is the last time Steve Jobs almost got fired from Apple. After Apple recruited him back after he left Next, the first thing he wanted to do was release and build an MP3 player. He was going to call it the iPod. Apple's board held a vote of no confidence that he survived by one vote. He almost got fired over the iPod. And the reason was the board said, Steve, you're nuts. MP3 players are owned and dominated by the Japanese players, the Sonys, the Samsungs. There is no room for an American-made and American-branded music player anymore. We've lost that market. Move on to something else. And the board had a very heated discussion trying to convince him that he was crazy. Don't do that. All you're going to do is make us go broke. And he survived that vote of confidence by one vote and managed to push that on. And the reason I point that out is, if the people running Apple can be that wrong, I mean, that product saved the company. So can anybody else. And on both sides, you're going to hear people push something that maybe doesn't go anywhere, or maybe something that looks like it has no future really does. And what you need to do is try those things. You know, how many people here use a computer? Okay. Chances are, if you don't like a product at all, neither will a lot of people. But if you find something that changes your behavior in a way you really like, it probably does have a market. Stay up with what you're doing now. You know, I saw only a few hands go up with who's using Visual Studio 2012. Now, how many of you have secretly installed it and you're playing with it and trying to keep up and learning stuff? See, that should be a lot more. You have the opportunity to do it. And the reason I would recommend that is you're never going to convince your employer to use it unless you can talk about any of its benefits. And the only way you're going to be able to intelligently talk about the benefits that it has is to actually make use of it, try it, and even see what things don't help you, that you think maybe it is worse. But you'll at least already have a way to confidently discuss those options and confidently move forward with those and make something interesting happen. Whether it's that, whether it's trying the JavaScript or C++ things in Windows 8, or as Carl said, you can do this. It's really not that hard. You can leverage the skills you already had. Build something and try. And look at that creativity. If you grab a Windows 8 box, right now there's a few thousand apps in the store. You are probably going to find things you really wish were there that you don't have. Go ahead and build it. Give it a chance. Decide if you want to market it and be an ISV. Like Carl says, maybe you know, there's only a few companies that make a huge amount of money, but there are a lot of people that make a reasonable amount of money. You know, Eric Sink has coined the term the micro ISV. If you put an app out there and you're a one-person developer and you get enough downloads, that's fine. That's a business. It doesn't have to support 1,000 people yet, but it can do a lot of interesting things in the meantime. And then finally, once you figure out something that you really want to do, every once in a while, go ahead and put a big bet out there and say, I really believe in this, and try something with it. But I think that this is one of those very, very interesting times where there's a lot of change going on, and there's a tremendous amount of different things that we can do, and a really large number of different opportunities in the number of people trying to use computers now, the number of people who want to have one of these devices, and the potential to do something with it and to create something really cool and really interesting. And that's it.
All right. So, we're going to make a John and Rocks episode now. There's a particular stuff. If you've ever heard us do a live show, you'll find out that none of our shows are live. They're recorded. We often say recorded live, which is silly to say because who's ever heard recording dead? If dead recorded. Goes to the end. There. Carl, we're going to take, the first thing will happen is a room count. It's really hard to do in a room this big. The reason we do it is there's noises in the room, we're going to remove that. You'll find out we're really nutty about audio quality. The show sounds really good because we're trained.
A little overnight. Because I'm probably going to get called out for tech support. So,
Wait, it's coming in.
I am a smart guy. Smart guy.
And so Carl's going to say, hey, Omaha, welcome to Dr. Rock.
Yeah. And you're going to make some noise. And when I mean make some noise, scream at the top of your lungs, pick up the chair, beat the person next to you, take off your clothes, run around. All right, maybe not, but just make some noise. Okay? You ready? And by the way, now the tablet is out there. Make sure that it gets passed and that everybody gets a chance to enter. Probably don't take your time. You know, we have to get through the last two rows here before we're done. So be speedy about it. All right, here we go. 5 seconds, silence. Hey, Omaha! Welcome to Diamond Rise! This is the biggest crowd we've had on the trip so far.
Yeah.
100,000.
At least.
At least 100,000. Wow, Omaha, who knew? You guys had such a thriving .NET community. Give yourself a big hand. We're here with Bill Wagner. Bill, how about a hand for Bill? An inspiring talk about change.
Sure.
And the embracing of change. And what I really liked was your impetus to put something out there every once in a while. Take a risk. Be a superhero. Man, I can't say enough how important that is. Take calculated risk.
Yeah, just keep placing bets and keep trying to make a positive difference somewhere.
I think one of the challenges there, don't want to get all maudlin on this particular thing, is knowing when the horse is dead and you should stop whacking at it.
Yeah, you know, we've got a small company and we're often investing in new technologies. We're trying new different things. There's a closet full of stuff that we're not pulling out.
Well, and also, you know, I never say that is to say don't try stuff because something might die, but also folks recognize it. We get some emails. Folks write us email all the time on the show, and we read a lot of them. But there are emails we get that they would say, please do not read this, and I just like your advice. Right? It's typically career type advice. And then one of the ones that I responded to recently, where I looked and I said, you know, it sure sounds like your career at that company is actually dead. Just nobody's got around to telling you.
Right.
Why,
You're dropping like flies and
Yeah.
pulling up the resources. And
We had a conversation on a code match a while back where there was an open space talk that they got started where the title was Change Your Organization or Change Your Organization.
Right.
And at some point you're going to have to do that.
It's take it from managing the after of changing people or changing people.
And it's, you know, I find that it's interesting listening to people who are recruiters trying to bring people into this business or look for jobs. And when we're trying to hire people, we have a big problem working with recruiters because they're looking for, you know, what skills do you want? Do you want 3 years of ASP.NET, 3 years, 5 years of C#, 6 years, whatever it is? And we're like, we want people who understand this stuff and are thinking.
Right.
Yeah, we can't find that.
Yeah. Well, they can't measure it easily.
Right. That is a lot harder.
Yeah.
I always thought it would be a very useful thing to assist a recruiter with, to have people who actually understand the technology they're hiring for to interview them. It seems like such a no-brainer, but typically the people who do the hiring are the people who are in the best position
You know, I think that's true. You know, and one of the things that we do is we'll now have people just, we have different puzzles or something that we'll do, and we'll pair program with somebody and, you know, try to knock out some code for a couple hours. And then once we do that, then, you know, you've got a pretty good idea if we really want to keep working with
Learn
that person.
so much about someone by just sitting down and coding with them for a few
Oh, it
minutes.
does. And, you know, and what's amazing is you don't just learn whether or not they can code, you learn if I'm going to want to work with this person.
Right.
You know, because you start asking them about something, they're like, oh no, this is the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Did you think about this? Right, this is what do you think?
I have a way, don't mess with my way.
You think it's pretty common in our industry for people to feel like they don't want to put themselves out there and make themselves look vulnerable, that they don't understand something?
I think that's common in almost every industry. You know, whether it's this, whether it's you know, lawyers. Have you ever tried to get a lawyer to say a straight thing ever in public?
They're the ultimate it depends guy.
Yeah, you know, this is not real legal advice.
The way it is.
Right. You know, and so I think that's a natural human reaction, right? You know, nobody wants to, you know, face that rejection.
You know, I learned this from sales guys, and I thought it would happen many, many years ago when I was actually doing this, was to interview routinely. Sales guys are always interviewed. In fact, I've got to a point now as an employer where if I want to hire sales guys, not interview routinely. Because it means he's no longer working. Okay, that I'm looking for a home, so I did think that pressure of, you know, I go where the money is, I go where I can be successful, and I'm always looking for the next thing and being conscious of that. I think and it really addresses two issues. One is tech people are notoriously bad interviewers.
Yeah.
They're just like stunningly bad. And the second one is remind yourself of what's important and what's worthwhile, and that you're good at stuff. Because often we get caught in the spiral and don't know what we're good at.
Yeah. Well, and often I think that what gets hard is you have, you know, this gets back to that looking for very specific skills when companies hire. You're looking for, oh, I need somebody who can do this. And then you become, you know, I can go back in time and remember a friend of mine who was the person who knew printer drivers. Right? And that was all they did. You know, and then they didn't need any more printer drivers, and you don't need the person who knows printer drivers.
Now I remove the widget and send
Right.
it away.
Yeah, and
But I think there's a part of this of not casting yourself as a widget. I am not the sum total of the individual skills, the individual products I've learned.
right, you know, it's not I can write code with C# or whatever it is. You know, it's that I can understand how to create software and I can explain it to others.
Yeah, and probably learning how to learn and knowing how to learn and learn quickly and problem solve. There's the whole meat of it right there. I mean, if you can adapt your skills to a new technology quickly and understand it and master it, you're the guy everybody wants to hire.
Oh, absolutely. And I think some of that is taking risks and then looking at it and moving on. We had a great workshop that we brought in one from Florida who teaches improv.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing experience to just get your mind out there and start to be creative. You know, and
Take risks.
And take risks. In fact, the first rule of improv, which with this huge crowd we should try to do again, is the first rule of improv is after you do any kind of improv, you have to say, I failed, as loud as you possibly can. Because you're going to every time you improv. So, everybody, right? 1, 2, 3. See, there you go. That wasn't so bad.
Clearly failed that, actually.
Yeah. Let's try that again. That's how improv works. We're going to try one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3. So now I'll hire you because, you know, you're at least trying things.
You know where I first started improv being mixed with IT and specifically developers was Greg Brill from Infusion Development. You know, they've taken a lot of our listeners actually over the years.
Over the years.
And that's what they do. They regularly are required to take part in improv workshops.
I can see where that could be really, you know, it just gets your mind really sharp because you have to be thinking of doing things very quickly. And
Not only that, it's also the attitude of no blocking.
right, you can't pause and think, is this going to work or not?
But you can't pull back.
Right,
If
right.
someone throws an idea, you know, improv, someone throws an idea, you just run with the idea.
Exactly.
We'll evaluate your back later, right? Don't block.
Right.
If you act that way in meetings, the dynamic of the meeting changes a big curve.
And it's also the blending of metaphors instantly. Like, okay, you're a seagull trying to pick up a pigeon in a bar. Go. You know, and what? Huh?
I read this great book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
But the brain can map like that. I'm reading this great book by David Brooks, The Social Animal, and he talks about mapping and how the smartest computer can't say, I'm a pirate, like a 2-year-old, or I'm a tree, but I and a tree blend, and now I take on the characteristics of the tree. That is an amazing thing, but it crosses the brain.
See, and now listen to developers when they describe their software. They already do that. They'll read their software as though there's a bee doing that stuff.
So here comes the 1 bit.
Right, yeah.
So I pass that guy over the wall to you, you catch that, throw it, this guy comes back, you catch that, yeah.
So we do that, but at times we just can't do it with people who aren't, just as nerdy as we are.
Yeah, very cool. So tell us, you've done some really amazing things with SRT Solutions lately. They're growing quite a bit. Just tell me some of the things that have been happening.
Oh, wow. So we've added a number of new customers, really trying to grow the breadth and trying to do a lot of different things. We get to work, since we're in Ann Arbor, Michigan, we get to do some work with departments at Michigan. The only sad thing about that is we can't talk about what we're doing there until they publish it. Other than it's really trying to do some things to help things either with medicine or with psychiatry or with some of that, and help some things get more efficient if some of the research that they're doing, that we're supporting with software, turns out the way they're hoping it will. So that's really satisfying to see some things that may actually really have a very big positive impact on people's lives.
Talk about changing the world. Yeah.
That's what you're hoping, right? We've, let's see, which is a couple other interesting things recently. There's another environmental company that's now adding tablet applications to go out on inspections. They would typically go out, pad and paper and a camera, and then take all these notes, take it back to the office, and somebody puts those all in place. Now they're going out with a small tablet, taking the pictures with the tablet, annotating it. It all just drops right into to the database immediately, so the customers can see what's going on in the field very quickly. So making people a lot more efficient, helping clean up different things in the environment when the inspections are done. So
I think that's a new form factors related to that in a big way.
I think so. It's so much easier to carry things around now.
Yeah, I've been talking around towns expressing this idea of taking the computer to work rather than bringing the work to the computer.
Right.
And that's part of the form factor, but suddenly there's a whole lot of people who didn't get to use a computer before because the work wasn't affordable, that now have to be real.
Yeah, think about the things that you don't need when you're not tied down to a desk. All the stuff that you can get rid of. And starting from the building,
Right.
And moving on to all the infrastructure that supports those.
But at times, the building, I think, is still sort of important, but more as a social thing than as a, this is where we lock everything up. It's more that we are social beings, and people get more productive when they're not constantly on their own.
Yeah, gather together for a common purpose.
Yeah.
So those moments.
So I think that's a big part of it. And we're starting to put our own little bets out there here and there. Our first Windows 8 app hit the store today.
Nice.
So with the earlier builds, I was starting to do some things, and I'm looking at it, trying to see things. And one of the things I saw was missing was there was no calculator in there. I'd have to go into the desktop site to use it. So we started to make one. We figured, this isn't that hard, right? I mean, the math is the same for everybody.
Yeah, it turns out division still.
Right. So what we did is we played with making different skins on it. So if you look for steampunk calculator, you'll find ours. So the first one is this totally steampunk look, and then the second skin that's already got is a very simple version for little kids. So the buttons are great, big, look like a 3-year-old's toy.
Right.
And we're going to add a scientific one and do some of that later if the download supported, and see what happens.
You know what that calculator app needs? A REST-based API.
Sure. I can tell.
Okay, that's a really absurd statement, folks, because you're just making an API wrapper around plus and minus. That's why it's funny. Stay with me.
You want context?
Okay, yeah, context.
You see, I appreciate your talk on change, it's enjoyable, but it's always been true. I realize more people are focusing on this right now, trying to decide what it is about now that's got us more focused on change than the past 15 years, which is not a heck of a lot of change.
Yeah, and this is one of those things I've been puzzling about too, as I'm looking at and trying to think of what I want to do next. You know, I have the two, effective C# and more effective C# books.
Yeah.
I did a live lesson on C# puzzlers, and the content's out there, and I think it's doing fairly well, but I got less enjoyment out of it.
The puzzlers.
Yeah.
If the folks didn't see this book, talk about it.
Okay, so the books, effective C# and more effective C# are meant to be, they're a series of small essays. There's 50 essays in each book. The books in total are 250, 300 pages.
So small.
And so they're small, and they're meant to be things that you should try to remember, and then the essays talk about why you should try to remember these things. Okay. And the reason that the video one just didn't work for me as well is when I was writing the book, I could picture people that I've worked with and explaining things to them. I could never do that as well doing video with nobody there. Like in like the webcast format where you're talking to no one, hoping there's somebody out there, and the writing just seemed to go better. So, and I was starting to think about what do I want to write next? And there's enough stuff going on, and it's like, what topic out there is big enough to be meaty enough that I really want to do another book on? And I started to really work on a couple outlines, so I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but it is, there's a couple ideas, and I hope to have something out middle of next year probably. But, it's kind of like, what's the big thing that's going on? But there just seem to be these leaps, and then we kind of look and watch, and then leaps. And I think the biggest reason this one feels bigger is almost all the major companies are moving into this mobile space.
Right.
You've got, Apple obviously with the iPhone 5 and the iPad, Microsoft with Windows 8, Windows Phone 8. You've got Droid tablets, the Droid phones. There's rumors of an Amazon phone.
Yeah.
And obviously the Amazon, the Kindle Fire. So there's all, it's like nobody's going, this mobile thing's a fad, these tablets are fads, nobody's saying that. So you've got all these things moving, and the price point puts them into so many more people's hands. Like Scott was mentioning, this is giftable, right? $200. But it also means these are devices that will work in developing countries. That now
It's not just first world technology.
Right, it's not just, so suddenly internet connectivity is no longer a first world problem, right? It's everywhere. And I think that's a big deal, to make a huge kind of thing that happens.
We're talking about types of apps and adoption in enterprise, which is really critical for Microsoft, and I think I gave the reasons in my talk why I think that they have an advantage. One is the whole security story, and that iPad just doesn't have in the enterprise. The other is Office, because people love their Excel, and if they can use that, and at the same time, pick up some apps from the App Store that support their work, but they're not necessarily enterprise apps.
See, and more than that, I think it's the ecosystem that they have around that I'm waiting to see how they leverage for the enterprise. So if you try the preview release of the next version of Office, I think it's going to be Office 14 is what it's called, and put a document in SkyDrive,
Yeah.
and start having multiple people edit it. If they're all editing with Word, you will get change bars of where the other people are actively working on the same document you are. Okay, but it will work if you're not connected. So it's a stronger story than what Google Docs has right now. Where you're relying on the JavaScript and you're doing all that sort of thing.
Right.
And in Google Docs, I started to run into errors depending on my browser where, because it's JavaScript and it's drawing on the canvas, I get this bit where I'm typing here, but the characters are showing up in a different spot on the screen. It's just annoying.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm getting the same problem.
But I like this idea that we're actually collaborating now.
Right.
We had a lot of fake collaboration for a while, where I work on a document, I
Here's the
send it
slide.
to you,
Yeah.
you work on it, and send it back to me.
Right.
They have a first time I ran into this was the old OneNote. We were using it for requirements gathering, and I had this strong belief that everybody needed to participate in the meeting, and a guy on a keyboard isn't in the meeting. So we could have two people on keyboards, so one of them could be participating and then they could switch off. You weren't just the transcriptionist, you could go back and forth. And OneNote allowed two people to attach the same document that was up on the projection screen, and you could both type literally at the same time.
Right, and that's one of the things that I think is really important to be able to, actually have real meetings with people who have screens and have computers in there.
Right.
And there's times when we occasionally work with large enterprises, and one of the worst things I've ever seen is when you walk in for a meeting and everybody opens the laptop,
Yeah.
And then
They're gone.
they're gone.
Yeah.
15 minutes in, they're on email. You know it, right? Because something came in that they had to do. And then suddenly the energy in the meeting just approaches zero and nothing else happens. And now you're sitting there wondering, well, why am I here? I can
You're basically, this is basically my dinner table experience.
Right. So what I do when that happens is I text the kids when they're looking at their phone.
Can you please pass the potato?
Right, right.
We're having technology-free dinners now.
Yes, we are too. And I made the joke just because that is a problem,
But the only way I could get that to actually happen was to give the wife a smartphone.
but.
Right.
When she was on it, the kids were annoyed, then technology-free dinners were
Yeah,
awesome.
that's right. You gotta make their point of view.
That's right.
Using the technology.
If they notice that you're ignoring them, then that conversation.
Oh, yeah. And all of us, developers especially, have that, superpower. Like, I haven't checked my phone in 5 minutes. There must be an email I'm missing.
So now the next thing we're doing at the lunch meetings is everybody has to take their phone out and put it face down.
Right.
And the first person who turns it over buys lunch.
That's a good one.
I like that.
I like that.
I remember Kim Cameron on the show ages ago talking about, he was really an identity guy, but he talked about attention. And I think it's the topic when you talk about change. I feel like we're hitting the threshold of attention problems. The level of distraction is so severe, a lot of stuff is breaking. We're on a cusp here of just that honestly, the most respectful thing I can do to you now is actually give you your right attention. And we just haven't much anymore.
Sorry, did you say something?
Yeah. And I think we've been on that road for a while. I mean,
Yeah.
Twitter is this amazing time sink.
Oh, yeah. I remember when Facebook was
Facebook, email,
Right.
and they're all hitting us. And one of the things that I just got in the habit of doing is, Outlook or any mail client has this feature to notify you when you get
The
mail.
toast box.
Post boxes or whatever. Turn that off.
Yeah.
And I make it so I will not check email other than like 2 or 3 times during the day.
I moved it onto a different computer.
Yeah.
That machine has none of it. I used to call it the communications machine, I now call it the noise machine. But it's got the email and the Twitter client and the IM client and the Skype client and all of the stuff that makes noise.
And you can schedule time to look at it.
See, and IM is different. We're trying to be respectful of each other in the office. And that's a way to get quick questions answered.
Yeah.
Or, start an IM client and then turn that into a desktop sharing if people are in different places.
Sure.
And try to do that. But it's really not meant to be let's keep this thing going all day long.
Yeah, push a postcard on the door.
Right.
But I do, but my big trick is if I start emailing in the morning, I've lost the net. If you actually want to get it writing or coding or anything done, you have to do that first.
Yeah,
So once you turn the email on, that's it.
right.
Or I send all my emails first and put everything in somebody else's court and then turn it off.
I've just never got to the send all part.
Yeah.
I get some way through it, that it's the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't even talked about how the whole social dynamic around texting, and if you do not answer text right away, you're somehow snubbing the person, right?
That seems almost generational. Our kids are like this in that, both my wife and I used to get annoyed because we got 2 in college and we'll text them and you won't hear back. I know they see this.
Yeah.
Because I've seen them with their phones. I know they've seen this. But then you watch them text and they'll throw something out there and then they won't care. 45 minutes later they'll get the answer back.
Right.
And a text is like that. It's like, it's out there. It'll come back. Whatever. Yeah.
And it's not a real-time communication.
No.
Yeah, I think it's just our expectation that we expect it to come back right away.
Right.
And then when we do that, people pick up on those cues, and so they text us right away, and then you're just, pouring gas on the fire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let's turn our speculation hat on a little bit, and because one of the things that was amazing, just to sidetrack about your talk, is the story of Steve Jobs, and how, you can tell the story, but it really illustrated to me that the biggest changes happen when nobody believes the change is going to happen.
Yeah, so, and where I heard this story was the last interview that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates did together. And they talk about their careers, this thing for about 2.5 hours. And there's one spot where Steve Jobs talks about when he came back to Apple. And he wanted to come up with new products because they were, he was telling them, we're just losing too much market share to the Windows PCs. We've got to have a non-PC kind of product, something else. And he wanted to make this portable music player. And the board held a vote of no confidence with him, that he barely survived because they were convinced. And think of the marketplace before the iPad or the iPod came out, and it was all the Sony Walkman, the Discman, the MP3 players.
Yeah, you had the creative set and the little.
And
They weren't very good.
the board was convinced that there was no room for another portable music player. There just isn't.
They already raced to the ground at the floor at that point.
Right.
They take them as cheaply as they possibly could.
Right. And here comes this thing, and Steve Jobs goes and says, no, we're going to do this, we're going to do it better, it's going to be simpler, it's going to be easier to use, it's going to do all this. And boom. And that really revived the company. But he almost got fired again over that.
Yeah.
Because they didn't believe him. Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm not comparing myself to Steve Jobs because I'm sitting here, he's not, but the story that I wanted to tell was when I started Dot Rocks, I liked listening to the radio, and everybody was video. Video was the holy grail of the internet, but it wasn't there yet, right? But you could make an MP3, you could send it around, and I wanted to do radio on the internet, and I remember getting this from Microsoft people, I got this from developers, I got it from everybody who I told about it. Why aren't you doing video? Why aren't you doing video? And I thought, well, I look at my life, I like to listen to the radio when I'm doing dishes, and when I'm walking the dog, and when I'm out and doing other things, and when I'm watching video, I'm sitting there watching video. I don't particularly feel good about myself when I'm watching TV all day, but when I'm out doing stuff and listening to, inspiring stuff, synapses are firing. So, and then podcasting, right? And I'm not comparing myself, but it's a little story that is the same kind of principle, that big changes happen when nobody thinks they're going to happen.
No, and it's when you actually think things through and listen to what you want.
Right.
And that also helps make better products, I think. If it's like, well, I wouldn't use this, but I think there's a market for it.
Right.
The focus groups say this.
Right.
And I think if you look at the things that we do with computers, and the form factors that I want, how much do I want to carry in my bag every day? How many devices do I want to carry? Why do I need all these extra peripherals? Should it be designed? And that gets to where I think that then you can start to see that, yeah, this one's going to be a success. Which is why I really like the Surface, is having used the build tablet from last year for quite some time. The on-screen keyboard is really painful to create reasonable hunks of content. So having that keyboard cover, I think, is a tremendous innovation. And I can't wait to get one of those.
Yeah, it's going to be light. And what do you think? You like a real keyboard? How do you like the on-screen keyboard out there? Yeah, not that good. But it does make a little clicking sound.
Yeah.
And I use it when I'm reading email, and if I have a 2 or 3 sentence email to respond quick, I'll use the on-screen keyboard. But if I actually have to, 3 or 4 paragraphs, that's just painful.
Can't touch that.
No.
There's no flow to that keyboard.
Yes.
And it's frustrating to me that still to this day, the reference with a tablet is that middle tablet, which was an odd tablet at the beginning.
Yeah, it wasn't particularly well.
Well, it runs Visual Studio, which is not something that a normal tablet should be expected to do.
Such a small screen.
And see, that's where I think there's multiple different form factors. And this gets to that, how many devices do I want to carry?
Yeah.
You know, and we're looking at this with the family. Of, do we want a WinRT one or an Intel one?
Right.
And what do we want to do with it? And it gets to what you want to put on it. You know, and I think Visual Studio, I don't see running on a pure tablet. And I don't see a Windows Store version of it because you can't really sandbox with a bumper.
It's not that kind of product, but
Right.
I think the software development is not a normal thing for people to do. You know, this group
Right.
accepted.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like I want my family to have RT tablets because of the lower tech support for me.
Right.
This is the gift that I can give them that gives back to me in a big way because they just can't mess that machine up. They can't install dumb stuff on it.
And there's a few things that I think has to get there for that to really be the successful machine they want it to be. And sadly, I think one of those, iTunes has to get on there somehow. Just
Actual iTunes or you mean an equivalent?
actual iTunes.
I don't think that's done now.
I know, but I think, but sadly, I think that's one of the big
Like
things.
I said, the big change happens when nobody.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
You're also talking about iTunes. I'd rather stick needles in my eyes. That's the nasty piece of software.
It is, but so many people use it.
Yeah.
It's basically a virus.
What you really want is a piece of
It's a
software.
virus that's spreading quickly.
And honestly, it's worse than that because you talk about the support issues.
Yeah.
You know, both daughters' machines had a huge problem with iTunes with a new release last year, and it was because the MySQL installation that comes as part of iTunes was messed up.
Right.
Who outside of this room and your listeners would figure that one out and fix it?
Or no, it doesn't.
You know,
Yeah.
this is the product opportunity. Is embrace and extend iTunes.
Mhm.
A different tool that goes, finds your iTunes libraries and gives you a view to it that doesn't suck.
Yeah. Yes.
That's the problem.
Mhm.
It doesn't break, it isn't perpetually shoving QuickTime in my face, it isn't constantly needing updates. Its updates are more important than anything I'm working on. Not that I'm upset about
How
it.
do you feel about
I'm
this?
just, you know, pull back.
Oh yeah, and it's the same thing. You know, my daughter said, "Dad, my fan's going on my laptop."
Yes.
And it has been for the last 30 minutes, and that can mean only one thing: iTunes. There's nothing else that does that.
Except maybe if you study at home working.
Yeah. Well, what's next for you, sir?
I don't know.
Well, you've got an app in the app.
We've got another answer. You know, we've got a number of ideas that we're experimenting with and playing with, and as any of them get ready to release, I think we're going to release a few more.
Have you got a gold rush sort of, I need to get there first kind of mindset for this?
I don't know that you need to get there first, but I do think you need to get there early enough that you're not totally lost.
Well, because I look at
Yeah.
the Apple, I know the Apple Store celebrates the 600,000 apps, but I think that's a disaster. Like you can't find anything.
And yeah, and I think that's going to be something. Yeah.
Tiny little kids.
Well, and how do you come up with search terms
Yeah.
that finds that
How
thing
do
that you're looking
how
for?
do I, as a developer who wants to build products in this space, have an opportunity to succeed?
Right.
And I think right now, when the store is young, you have a better opportunity to see, good reason to get into the suit.
So how do, that's the thing, think about the rating system. How do people find the stuff to begin with? Does it start with, one app gets uploaded, it has no stars, somebody stumbles across it or gets it, goes, wow, I'm gonna rate this 5 stars, and then it just snowballs from there? How does that happen? I think it happens outside of iTunes is what I'm getting at.
Right, and I think that's,
Social networks.
and I think that's one of those things that they're really, the Microsoft editors at the store are very, very protective of how that happens, so you can't game it.
Right.
And I really don't know, but I do think, if you look at Amazon reviews or you look at Stack Overflow or anything like that, that kind of a concept that the good stuff is going to bubble up is what they're really counting on.
Yeah, and I think what I'm saying is I think most of that, hey, check this out, happens outside the store.
I
I
think
mean,
so.
the corollary to your point there is really, don't just send to the store and think it's gonna happen.
Right.
Right.
Now the work starts.
You gotta get in front of people who are gonna love it and talk about it.
Right, and I think that's one of the things that they do well is when you get your app in the store, you know, they'll send you a link when it's released that says, you know, here's where your app is in the store. You can share this with people. And then, you know, you can blog about it, you can tweet about it, you can get your friends to talk about it, you know, and hopefully build some buzz about that. And then anybody who goes to that page, there's a link on there that says view this app in the store and get it.
Right.
Right, so you can then, if you're on a Windows 8 machine, you will then launch the store itself and go, do you want to download this? You know, and I think those things are significant to be able to help build that kind of a buzz around an app.
Well, again, Bill, your talk is very inspirational. It's pertinent, certainly, and very informative.
Well, thanks for having me. It was fun to come out from home.
Bill Wagner, ladies and gentlemen, give it up.